Greetings, everybody. I want to welcome you here to the Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show that is dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. So we're here to start a new series, one that I've been thinking about for a while, called Masterpiece Album Battles. So this basically came about because, as you know, I've done many of these album battles or album wars or band battles or band wars. A lot of them, most of them have been Ben feeding me albums from his collection, me listening to them and giving my opinions about them. And I did enjoy them. But this one, I decided that we're going to do something because, well, first of all, my masterpiece collection for me is a collection of albums that I consider to be masterpiece albums. They may not be masterpieces to you. In fact, some of you may not like some of them, or you may actually hate some of them. Some of them you may have your own masterpiece collection, but I can only do my own masterpiece collection, so that's what I'm doing. Part of the reason I'm doing this is because, so I'll give you a little brief history of how this works for me. So back in the 70s, I was listening to prior to that, not regularly though, stuff I had liked, but I didn't own any of it. Stuff from the Four Seasons, maybe a little bit of Elton John, stuff like that cousins of mine had, and I got into because of that, but never owned any of it. The first real album I owned was this one called Kiss Alive. So, love this album right from the start. It's probably was my favorite album from all of the 70s right into the 80s, was my favorite rock album. And then it was kind of replaced by the explosion of music that I started listening to all kinds of different bands. Four of them in particular, Styx, Rush, Black Sabbath, and Queen. Those were the four bands that I kind of got into right away. And then there was a whole horde of other bands that I listened to. And there was probably a dozen albums during that period of time that probably were my favorite album. Probably the two biggest ones at the time were probably Heaven and Hell from Black Sabbath and Rush's Permanent Waves. Those were the two that I listened to, and probably if you had put a gun to my head then, I would have named them as my two favorite albums during that period. Towards the mid 84 to 1985, one album emerged from that conglomeration of albums to become my favorite album, and that was this one, Triumph's Just a Game. And that remained my favorite album probably all the way up to 2019, 2020. So a good 34, 35 years that it was my favorite album. A lot of that had to do was because I wasn't buying a lot of new stuff, really wasn't listening to a lot of stuff. I would listen to my old stuff a lot. Every once in a while, I'd get a couple of albums here and there that were new to me. But basically, that was my favorite album for that period of time. And then it was kind of replaced by another album that was part of that group from that 80s. And this album became my favorite, replaced it probably in about 2019, 2020. And has remained my favorite album since then. So about 5.5 years now. But I've gotten to a point now, because I've been running this channel for 3.5 years, coming up to my 4th year. It'll be in August, will be our 4-year anniversary. And I'm not so sure anymore what my favorite album is. So I decided, you know what better way to do it than to force myself to listen to these albums competitively against each other, and thus come up with probably my favorite album. And I'm hoping that it could still be this album. I wouldn't be surprised if it was, but it may not be. There are several albums on this list that I have really grown in esteem for me over the last 3.5 years of this program. So anyways, there are 61 albums in my masterpiece collection. So what I did is I broke them into album battles of 4 albums each, except for the final episode, which will have 5. So that's 15 episodes in which we will have a round 1. And then The surviving album, or the album that finishes first in each of the band battles, will go into the semifinals. So that the final episode will have 2 albums that will go into it. So the 15th episode with the 5, I will pick 2 of them to go in. So we'll have a semifinals at that point, which will feature 16 albums in 4 battles. The winner of each of those battles will go on to the finals, and you'll have a final 4. So probably we're looking at 19 weeks here to do this entire thing. I think it'll be fun to do. It gives me a chance to listen to some albums that, for the most part, I'm very familiar with and like a lot. Like, there's not a lot separating the 61st album from the number 1 album, so anyways, so the first battle, now that we've got that far and you've got an explanation about what we're doing here, the first battle will consist of the following 4 albums. The first one, and how I came to determine who was going to battle each other. So the only 2 things I did is I rolled dice, putting 1 in each of the 15 categories, making sure that I didn't put 2 albums by the same band in the same episode. That'll be probably just for the first round, because you may end up with too many albums from one band, then you would have to have them battle against each other. But for the first round, there are no 2 albums from any one band in any of the battles. So those are kind of the 2 restrictions that I put in. So the first battle will consist of these 4 albums: Kiss Alive, yes, the number 1 band for me early on. Genesis, Wind and Wuthering, another album I like quite a bit. Simon and Garfunkel, their greatest hits. This is the only greatest hits in my masterpiece, and the only reason that it's in there is because I liked it so much when I was deciding which bands to pull out of this and which not to. So what that meant is that I had originally started this masterpiece thing along with my friend when we were in our teens, probably 16 to 18, and we came up with what we thought was our masterpiece albums. There was like maybe 25 or 30, maybe it might have been as high as 40 over a 3 or 4 year period. And when I restarted to establish this at the beginning of this century, I took a bunch of those bands and albums out, because for me it was ludicrous that we named them and put them in there. A couple of them were greatest hits, and this was the only one that I left in, because this was the only album by them that I owned and I loved it a lot, so we got to stay in. And the other album, of course, in this foursome will be Peter Gabriel's Us. So so how we're going to work this is I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of the album, and then I'll give my ranking at the end of which, because I've listened to all 4 of them, 1 a day for the last 4 days. So we'll start with this one, Us. This was my reattachment to Peter Gabriel. I bought this back in, I think, 2018, 2017. I don't know why. I was out shopping with my daughter or something, and I had, for a rare event, I had some extra money on me, and I went into That Beat Goes On, which is a used record dealership here in, actually, I think it's all over Canada, but and I bought this one along with a Phil Collins album and a couple others I don't even remember. So I bought like 3 or 4. This one took right off for me. Became one of the albums I listened to a lot. Probably the first kind of dominant album for me in probably a decade. Probably at least, probably going back to like 2006, 2007 during the Songs in the Wood time. Anyways, so it got, that's why, how I got into this album, why I got into it. And I think it's a great album. There's no weak tracks on this album from top to bottom. I've had it now for about 8 years or so. I still listen to it on occasion. Of course, my favorite tracks on it are still the main tracks that most people know, Steam and Digging in the Dirt. And initially I liked Steam a lot because of the vocal screaming that he does on that. I just absolutely love it. Digging in the Dirt, though, kind of took its place. And then there's the song Kiss the Frog, another really fantastic tune. Lots of stuff on here. Come Talk to Me, Love to Be Loved, The Blood of Eden, all really good stuff. And then, of course, Secret World at the end, fantastic as well. So it's a really strong album. So when it had its chance to be made to a masterpiece, it got in the first try. The next one, of course, the aforementioned Simon and Garfunkel's Greatest Hits. The reason I like this is it has so many really classic stuff by them. Really good stuff. Mrs. Robinson, great tune. The 59th Street Bridge song, I like that a lot. The Sound of Silence, such a haunting kind of song. Scarborough Fair, this is one of my favorites to sing. Homeward Bound, another really great tune. Bridge Over Troubled Water kind of fits into that same Sound of Silence feeling. America, good track. Bookends is good. And then it ends off with probably my favorite song by these guys, Cecilia. This is the one that really kind of made me buy the album. So I'd heard it a few times and I had to have it. Yeah, so this came out in 1972, by the way. So another good one. Of course, Wind and the Wuthering, one of two Genesis albums I bought fairly close to the same time period. I think this one, I can never remember if I bought At Trick of the Tail or Wind and Wuthering first. I bought one of them first. And part of me thinks I got this one first because my friend had bought Trick of the Tail, so we tended to do that. But by the time we were doing these albums, we might have been over that. I just might have been buying my own stuff, so maybe I bought Trick of the Tail first. I'm not sure. Either way, this is a fantastic album. Very kind of solemn. But the best part about this album, I think, and the thing that really captures me with this album is the storytelling. Each of the songs, like One for the Vine, All in a Mouse's Night, Blood on the Rooftops, these are all storytelling and a little bit of 11th Earl of Mar. But 11th Earl of Mar I liked a lot because it was a heavier track, kind of moving along at a quicker pace, which when I first bought this album, I liked that a lot. Since that time, I've grown to like a lot of these storytelling songs a lot. Probably my favorite track on this album, might surprise people, is All in a Mouse's Night. I love the story. I love the whole way in which they put it together. But this is a very strong album for me, very strong. Next up, Kiss Alive. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about this. In days of old, I loved every track at some point or another. Some have kind of faded a lot. Or I will say Rock and Roll All Night, The Party Every Day is probably the one Kiss track that along with Detroit Rock City, those two are the two tracks that I hope I never have to listen to again. Although I did listen to it today. So I've always loved that picture. It was very reminiscent of the time period. I remember everybody looking like that. Absolutely killer. These are some of the best of Kiss's early stuff as well. Lots of heaviness here. The thing about this album that probably separates it and made the songs on here do better than they did on their three first albums is the energy level. Energy level is off the charts here. Really good stuff. And you've got a lot of, the songs sound a lot better. Putting that live performance in really gives it that hype that it needs. This is a perfect album for this band, and almost all the tracks on here are probably my favorites for the tracks, even off of their original single album. So fantastic album. So now I got to give you a rating on them. When I listened to them, how I felt. So I'll give them to you in their reverse order that I liked them. So the one that was the weakest for me was probably, and it won't come as much of a surprise, is the Simon and Garfunkel, and primarily because it's a greatest hits, and I've gone and moved on to their more studio albums. So, but still a great collection of songs. But it's going to come fourth here. The one that's going to come third is this one. Not for any other reason than it still is relatively new in my history, even though it's about 8 or 9 years going on now. I do like it a lot. I just don't think it's as strong as the other two that are coming up. The second place goes to this not by as much as I would have thought. I thought this was going to finish second, but I thought it would be much further back than it was. I was listening to it a couple nights ago, and I'm thinking how good the stories are, how good Phil Collins' voice sounds, how well these songs are put together, how this album has stood very well for me. And of course, it has a great album cover and reverse cover too, the bleak landscape with a kind of solemn song. Very apropos cover for the songs that you get on this. And this, of course, being the final album to feature Steve Hackett, really has an impact as well. So that finished second. Of course, the number one was Kiss Alive. I wasn't sure this was going to finish number one when I first started it, because I've had this album, not this particular one, this one's fairly new, but I've had this particular, a version of this album at some, either in vinyl or in CD or in cassette over the last, now we're going to say 50 years I've had this album. So I thought maybe it's going to suffer from some serious burnout, but it still doesn't. It still sounds good. When I put it on, I still get energized by it. And so it had to win here. It didn't win by as much as I thought it would win, though. I thought it would win much higher for me than Wind in the Wuthering. So that's my first. So it finishes number one, and we'll go on to the semifinals. So there you have it. Those are my rankings. This episode is going to be longer than the next episodes because I'm not needing to explain as much now. So Kiss Alive finishes first. Wind in the Wuthering second. Us by Peter Gabriel third. And Simon & Garfunkel's Greatest Hits finishes fourth. So 3 of those albums are done now. Kiss Alive will go on to the semifinals. So our next battle will be next Saturday at noon, and it will feature the following albums: Yes's Close to the Edge, Rush's A Farewell to Kings, Styx's Grand Illusion, and AC/DC's Back in Black. This it's like splitting hairs here, right? So this will be very difficult because basically I think any of these albums could win it. The only thing that might benefit one or the other albums is how much I've worn on it, like how much it's worn on me. Is it wore out? Do I find a little bit too much burnout on it? I don't know. We're going to find out here. I know a few of them will probably have burnout, but once I listen to it, I'll know. So anyways, I hope to see you all for that second episode next Saturday. So please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe. If you want to be notified of the battles, hit the notification bell above my head. And if you have any comments about any of the albums we did today or the upcoming ones, you can talk about that as well in the comment section below. We will see you next week on Saturday at noon for my masterpiece album battles. Take care and have a good one. Bye.